Beloved soul, take a moment and slow your breathing. Let yourself settle into this present space. What you are reading now did not come to you by accident. There is a deeper timing at work here, and it feels like this message found you exactly where you are supposed to be in your life right now. Something around you is shifting. On the surface, everything may still look the same, quiet, unchanged, even normal. But beneath what you can see, something real is moving. It may not be visible yet, but it is active. And the truth is, what is unfolding in your situation is stronger than what your natural eyes can currently understand. If you are able to feel even a small sense of this message, pause and reflect on it. Not because you need to react, but because awareness matters in moments like this. You did not keep chasing. You did not keep sending message after message, trying to fix, explain, or prove your place. At some point, you stopped. You stepped back from trying to hold together something that required only your effort to function. That stopping was not weakness. It was a quiet decision. You withdrew from someone who had become comfortable receiving your attention without offering the same care back. And in that moment of withdrawal, something shifted that you may not fully understand yet. The person who once assumed your presence would always be there is now facing something unfamiliar. Your energy is no longer constantly reaching them. Your attention is no longer available on demand. And what remains is silence where your effort used to be. That silence is not empty. It is powerful. Because absence speaks in a way that words never can. When your presence was consistent, it created a sense of stability for them. They did not have to question anything. They did not have to reflect deeply. They did not have to decide what they truly value. But now that your effort is gone from that space, they are left with themselves. And that change creates awareness. Right now, even if you cannot see it, they are thinking more than before. They are noticing your absence in small ways, not through conflict or drama, but through the simple reality that something familiar is no longer there. And the mind reacts strongly to that kind of change. Before this, you were the one holding the connection together. You were the one reaching, explaining, checking, showing care, and keeping things alive. Without realizing it, that created a pattern where most of the emotional movement came from you. Over time, that kind of imbalance can become normal to the other person. They begin to rely on your consistency without recognizing how much effort it takes from you. Not always out of cruelty, but often out of comfort and habit. But a connection where only one person carries the emotional weight cannot stay balanced forever. At some point, something has to change. When you stopped chasing, that structure shifted. Not through confrontation, not through conflict, but through withdrawal. And now the foundation they were used to has become unstable. Human beings often do not fully value something while it is constantly available. Familiarity can create emotional blindness. But when that availability disappears, awareness begins to return. Your absence interrupts what they expected. It creates questions in their mind. It forces them to notice what they were not noticing before. And that is where reflection begins. This is not about manipulation or control. It is about truth becoming visible when imbalance is no longer covered by constant effort. There is also a deeper emotional process happening here. When you were always present, always available, always responding, they were not required to sit with uncertainty. Your energy filled the gaps before they could feel them. But now those gaps are open, and open space creates reflection, whether a person is ready for it or not. The human heart is not designed to stay fully comfortable in imbalance forever. At some point, silence becomes noticeable, distance becomes real, and questions begin to form that were never asked before. What changed? Why it feels different? What they actually valued? What they took for granted? This is part of how awareness returns. there is also something important happening within you at the same time. This silence is not only affecting them, it is also reshaping you. When you stop pouring all your energy outward into someone who is not meeting you halfway, something begins to return to you. Your attention comes back. Your emotions settle. Your mind becomes less focused on constant effort and more aware of your own needs. In that space, clarity begins to form. You start to see things more honestly. You begin to understand patterns that were hard to see while you were emotionally invested in trying to keep things alive. This is why stillness can feel uncomfortable at first, but later becomes grounding, because it removes confusion and replaces it with truth. You are also beginning to guard your emotional energy more carefully, even if you do not fully realize it yet. That is not distance in a cold sense. It is protection. It is awareness. It is learning where your energy should and should not go. And in that process, something important is being revealed. The imbalance that once felt normal is now becoming visible. You can start to recognize how much you were giving, how much you were carrying, and how often you were the one initiating everything. That recognition is not meant to create bitterness. It is meant to bring clarity, because clarity changes direction. Now, in their experience, they are no longer receiving the same level of emotional input from you. And that absence creates space where they have to think for themselves instead of simply responding to your effort. This can lead to different responses. Some people become reflective. They start to realize what your presence actually meant. They start to understand the emotional value they were receiving without fully acknowledging it. Others may resist that reflection. They may try to convince themselves it was never important. They may avoid the discomfort of self-examination. They may step back further instead of leaning in. But either way, truth becomes clearer when constant emotional support is no longer filling every silence. And what they do in this silence reveals something important. It reveals how they handle emotional responsibility when it is no longer being carried for them. It reveals whether they are capable of meeting you with effort or only comfortable receiving effort. At the same time, your emotional world is also becoming more honest. Without constant chasing, you are no longer feeding the cycle of uncertainty in the same way. Your thoughts are less scattered. Your energy is less drained. Your perspective begins to stabilize. What once felt confusing starts to make more sense when you are no longer in constant pursuit of resolution from someone else. This silence creates space for emotional truth on both sides. On your side, it brings awareness and recovery of your energy. On their side, it creates reflection and awareness of absence, and absence always reveals what presence was covering. Another important shift is happening in how emotional maturity becomes visible. When someone is truly emotionally grounded, they respond to distance with reflection. They consider their behavior. They take responsibility for what they contributed or failed to contribute. But when someone is not emotionally mature, they may react by avoiding, denying, or minimizing what existed. They may protect their pride instead of facing truth. They may choose comfort over growth. This moment shows which direction they lean toward. And that matters more than words ever could, because actions in silence reveal truth more clearly than actions in comfort. There is also a deeper emotional reality here. If their feelings were real and grounded, your absence will not erase them. It will highlight them. They may begin to miss not just your attention, but your presence as a real part of their life. But if the connection was mostly sustained by your effort, then your withdrawal exposes that reality as well. Because what was dependent on constant input begins to fade when that input is gone. Either outcome is revealing. And even when truth is uncomfortable, it is still better than confusion. Because confusion keeps people stuck. Truth moves them forward. Now, this silence is also working within you in a quiet way. It is not only about what they are doing or feeling, It is also about what is being healed inside you. When emotional noise decreases, inner awareness increases. You begin to notice what you ignored before. You begin to feel what you suppressed while trying to keep things going. You begin to understand your own emotional needs more clearly. That understanding is part of your growth, even if it feels unfamiliar at first. There is strength in this stillness, even when it feels like uncertainty. Because it is removing dependence on constant emotional reaction and replacing it with awareness and self-direction. And over time, that changes how you move in relationships entirely. This moment is also revealing what is not meant to continue in your life. When something requires you to constantly overextend yourself just to maintain it, that imbalance becomes unsustainable. Your withdrawal is not just a reaction, it is a correction. It is the removal of excess emotional weight that you were never meant to carry alone. And what remains after that removal shows you what is real, what is mutual, and what is actually capable of growing. So even in silence, there is movement. Even in distance, there is clarity forming. Even in stillness, something important is being revealed on both sides. And whether they move toward you or not, you are no longer standing in the same emotional position you were before. That alone changes everything. Beloved soul, pause for a moment and let your breathing slow down. Let your mind come into stillness, even if only for a short while. What you are reading right now is not something that arrived by coincidence. There is a deeper timing behind this moment, and it feels as if this message found you exactly where you are in your life right now, not by accident, but by alignment. Something is shifting around you, even if your outer world looks unchanged. On the surface, everything may seem quiet, normal, or even stuck in the same place it has always been. But beneath what you can see, something real is moving. Something is rearranging itself in ways that are not yet visible to your natural understanding. And even if you cannot fully explain it, you may already feel that change is in the air. Take this moment not as instruction, but as awareness. You do not need to rush toward anything. You do not need to force understanding. Just recognize that something is unfolding beyond what you can currently see. There was a point where you stopped chasing. You stopped sending repeated messages. You stopped trying to fix what felt one-sided. You stopped explaining yourself again and again in hopes of being understood by someone who was not meeting you halfway. You simply paused and stepped back. That pause was not defeat. It was not failure. It was a quiet turning point that came after emotional exhaustion, after giving too much of yourself into something that was not returning the same depth back to you. You withdrew your energy from a place where it had become expected, but not truly valued. And in that simple act of stepping back, something began to shift that you may not fully understand yet. The person on the other side of this connection is now experiencing something different. Where there was once your consistent presence, your attention, your care, and your emotional availability, there is now space. There is distance. There is silence where your effort used to fill the gaps. That silence is not empty, it carries weight, because absence is not nothing. Absence is awareness forming. When your presence was constant, it created a rhythm in the connection, a predictable emotional flow. Even if they did not consciously think about it, your effort created stability for them. They could rely on it. They could expect it. They could receive it without needing to question what it cost you internally. But when that rhythm stops, the system of comfort they were used to is disrupted. And disruption always leads to awareness. Now they are noticing things differently. Small moments feel different. Gaps feel louder. Silence feels longer. And what once required no thought now begins to invite reflection. This is where confusion often begins, not as chaos, but as quiet mental repetition. Thoughts start looping without clear answers. They begin to question what changed. They may wonder if something they said caused it. They may wonder if you are upset. They may wonder if they misread the connection. Or they may even start questioning themselves in ways they did not expect. These thoughts do not always come with clarity. They often come in cycles. The mind tries to resolve something emotionally unfinished, but without enough information, it keeps turning the same questions over and over again. What matters most is not just what they think, but what this silence reveals. Because when you were constantly present, the connection did not require them to fully step into emotional responsibility. Your effort filled the space. Your consistency carried the weight. Your communication kept things alive. And over time, that can create imbalance without either person fully realizing it in the moment. But when your energy is no longer constantly flowing toward them, the imbalance becomes visible. Not through conflict, but through absence. And what was once hidden by familiarity now becomes something they can feel. At this stage, different responses begin to form depending on the person's inner maturity. Some people, when faced with absence, turn inward. They begin to reflect more honestly. They start to notice their own patterns. They consider how much they contributed and how much they received without equal return. They begin to see where they may have become passive in the connection. This kind of reflection is not immediate. It develops slowly as silence continues. A person with emotional awareness does not rush to blame the situation or rewrite the story to protect their ego. Instead, they begin to sit with discomfort. They begin to ask themselves harder questions. What did they take for granted? What did they assume would always be there? What did they fail to express when they had the chance? This kind of inner questioning can lead to clarity, but only if the person is willing to face it honestly. Other people respond differently. Instead of reflection, they may move into avoidance. They may distract themselves. They may minimize the importance of what was lost. They may convince themselves it was not that significant in order to protect their pride. Or they may wait, expecting the other person to eventually return to old patterns. But silence has its own language, and it does not support illusion for long. At the same time, something important is also happening within you. When you stop chasing, your energy begins to return to you. Your mind is not constantly focused outward anymore. Your emotions are not being pulled into repeated cycles of effort, uncertainty, and emotional overextension. In that return of energy, something begins to settle. Your thoughts become less scattered. Your emotional space becomes less occupied by constant reaction, and slowly, clarity begins to form where confusion once lived. You begin to see the situation more honestly, not through emotional urgency, but through distance. And distance has a way of revealing truth that closeness often hides. You may start to recognize patterns you did not fully acknowledge before. The imbalance becomes clearer. The effort distribution becomes more visible. The emotional weight you are carrying becomes easier to see for what it was. This is not meant to create resentment. It is meant to create understanding. Because understanding allows you to move differently going forward. There is also something deeper happening in this silence. It is not only about the other person realizing absence. It is also about you learning emotional boundaries that strengthen your inner stability. When you stop overextending yourself into spaces where your energy is not being matched, you begin to recover parts of yourself that were slowly being drained. You become more aware of where your effort goes. You become more conscious of what you tolerate. You become more sensitive to imbalance. That awareness is not loss, it is growth. And growth often begins in silence, not in noise. On their side, the absence of your presence creates space for emotional reality to surface. If there is genuine connection, absence does not erase it. It reveals it more clearly. They may begin to recognize your value in a way they did not fully appreciate when everything was easily available. But if the connection was sustained more by your effort than by mutual emotional depth, that truth also becomes visible in time. Because what depends heavily on one-sided energy cannot maintain the same form when that energy is removed. Either way, clarity begins to emerge. And clarity, even when uncomfortable, is more honest than confusion. This silence also brings forward something important about emotional maturity. When someone is emotionally grounded, they respond to distance with reflection rather than denial. They are able to look at their behavior without immediately defending it. They are able to sit with discomfort long enough to understand their part in what unfolded. But when emotional maturity is still developing, the response often shifts toward avoidance or justification. It becomes easier to protect self-image than to examine responsibility. And this difference becomes clearer when external validation is removed. At the same time, your inner world continues to stabilize. You are no longer constantly pulled into emotional uncertainty in the same way. You are no longer waiting for constant responses to feel secure. You begin to regain a sense of inner grounding that was previously disrupted by emotional imbalance. This is where silence becomes transformative, not because it changes the other person, but because it changes your relationship with your own energy. It creates space for you to breathe again emotionally. It allows your thoughts to slow down. It gives you room to feel what you were too busy managing before. And in that space, something very real begins to form. A clearer sense of what is aligned with you and what is not. A clearer understanding of what mutual connection actually feels like compared to one-sided effort. A clearer awareness of what you are no longer willing to repeat. This is how emotional truth begins to replace emotional confusion. And in that process, what is not aligned with your life naturally begins to loosen its hold. Not through force, not through struggle, but through awareness. Because when you no longer feed imbalance with your energy, it cannot maintain the same shape it once had. What remains is truth. And truth always reveals what is real, what is mutual, and what is sustainable. And even if you do not yet know the final outcome of this connection, you are no longer the same person who was holding everything together alone. That alone changes the direction of everything that comes next.